In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front left axle on this Hyundai Santa Fe. Let's install this brand new TRQ part. Use a 21mm socket and take all 5 of your lug nuts off, then we can remove the wheel. Wheel is stuck, give it a couple taps and remove the wheel. Let's remove the axle nut. It takes a 32mm socket. However, before you do that, you have to straighten out this little area that is punched in. This is what locks the axle nut. So take a little punch or chisel and a hammer and tap it in here. You don't have to get it perfectly straightened out, but just enough for the axle nut to be able to slide off a little bit easier, especially if you're doing this with a breaker bar. Okay, that's the best it's going to get. Let's grab a 32mm socket and remove the axle nut. If you're using a breaker bar, you're going to want to hold the hub, so otherwise it'll just keep spinning. Okay. At this point, you want to make sure your axle pushes through and it's not seized in the hub on the splines. If it is, spray some rust penetrant, take a center punch chisel, and try to punch it through. Mine looks like it's good, so I can move on. I'm going to take this 12mm headed bolt off for this bracket. That way, when we pull the knuckle forward, it gives me a lot more space. I don't want to pull on the brake hose or the ABS wire. That'll damage both of them. Take this off, set that aside. To add some more slack to the ABS wire on the back side of this clip, pinch in those 2 little tabs and you should be able to slide this clip through. Just like that. Follow the ABS wire. On this wheel arch here, you'll see where the bracket for the ABS wire bolts on with a 12mm headed bolt. Remove that. This gives us even more slack in the wire. Let's remove the 2 strut bolts. These are 17mm in size on the bolt head. On the other side, you will have to use a 19mm wrench or socket to hold the nut. Remove both of these. I'm not going to take that bolt out yet. I'm going to leave it in so I can support everything while I loosen up the bottom. Okay, those are both loose. Now move the knuckle around and push these through. Pull this lower bolt out. Drop the knuckle down, make sure none of this gets pulled too far. Push the axle through. There we go. All right, there's no pressure on either of these, so we can continue. This is optional, but I'm going to remove this shield just so I can get a little bit better visual here. It is very tight in there when it comes to removing the axle from the inner CV joints, so the more space I can get, the better. 10mm socket on both of these bolts. There's a 3rd bolt right up in here. If you just pry this shield out of the way and look for it, it'll be right here. Also 10mm in size. Okay, now you should be able to remove this shield. There's that bolt that just fell down. This is it. Now you can remove this shield and get much better access to the axle. Now take a pry bar and stick it right through the bottom of this shield here. You can either go through this opening in the transmission casing, it's like a little slot, or right next to it. I'm going to start out right next to it, stick it behind that joint right where it goes into the transmission. I'm going to tap the pry bar up with a hammer just so I can get it basically wedged in between there, and then I'll pop the axle out by prying outward. Okay, there we go. Now grab the axle, slide it out of the transmission. There it is. Now take your new axle and line it up with the transmission. Slide it in. There we go. Use the weight of the axle to push it in. If you can't, just push it in and then use a rubber mallet on the end of it. Tap it until that C-clip on the end locks in, and you can't just easily slide it back out. Now let's bring this shield back in, if you took it off. I'm going to secure it with this first bolt here, just so it can stay in place. Make sure you're not pinching that brake line. Okay, that's snug, but this can still move, so let's line up the other two now. That one's snug. Last one right in the middle. That's all snug. Make sure it's tight so it doesn't fall off while you drive. Don't forget about the two bolts that hold the shield in underneath. Snug these up. Not too tight. You don't want to break the plastic. There we go. On the splines of the axle, I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize, just a thin coating. This way, in the future, if it has to be removed from the hub, it is less likely to be stuck, and it should come out nice and easy, just like it did earlier when we pulled it out. A thin layer will do the trick. If you put too much, it'll just squeeze out as you drive the axle in. Okay, that should be good. Now grab your CV axle, put it back into the hub, line up those splines, and now we're going to have our strut bolts ready. Make sure the ABS wire as well as the brake hose are not going to get pinched here. Spin the strut if needed. Pull the knuckle up. Try to line up at least one bolt. There we go. Push it through. Now grab your bottom bolt, move everything around until this one lines up. If you need to tap the bolt in, be gentle. You don't want to smash any of your wires, hoses, anything here. These are both lined up, so let's put the mounting nuts on the other side. Now let's tighten them down and torque them. Hold the mounting nut with a 19mm wrench. Press in on the knuckle. I know this doesn't really have an adjustment to it, but it has a little bit of wiggle room, and it's always best to start pushed inward. You're going to have to let your alignment professional do the rest from here anyway. Snug this up. Once you snug up one, the knuckle should stay in place, so let's snug up the other. 116 foot-pounds is the torque for this. On this lower one, it'll be difficult to torque the nut side, just because the caliper's in the way, so I'm going to torque the bolt side. Hold the mounting nut in case it wants to spin. That's 116 on that one. I'll just do the top one from here. There we go. Those are both tightened. Let's reinstall this bracket, line it up, and put that 12mm headed bolt back in. Put on the mounting bolt for this ABS wire bracket, snug it up. Now let's reattach this bracket, resecure it to the strut. Snug up the bolt. Reattach the ABS wire. Reinstall the axle nut. I'm going to bottom it out with my impact, but then of course I will torque it. I put a pry bar through the lug studs to prevent this from spinning as I torque it. 217 foot-pounds is the torque for this axle nut. There it is right there. At the top here, you'll see that the axle has a slot. Let's stake down the axle nut, grab a chisel or a punch, whatever you have, and just squish it down a little bit to lock it in. That should be good right there. Put the wheel back on. Thread on all 5 of your lug nuts by hand to make sure they don't cross thread. And then in a cross pattern, I'm going to bottom them out and snug them. And the torque for these is between 65 and 79 foot-pounds. I'm going to go for 79 in a cross pattern. Double check them. There you have it. Now you can go get yourself an alignment.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.